Welcome to HR Voices, a podcast for independent HR and people professionals and the businesses they support. HR Voices is brought to you by the expert team at HR Independence Limited. We hope you enjoy.
Hello and welcome to the next edition of HR Voices. I'm Charlotte Allfrey, your host, and I'm co-hosting today with Mary Asante. And we are very excited. Hi Mary, I'm very excited today because we have gone global. So we are speaking to Dr. Lynda Folan, who is actually based out in Australia. So this is quite exciting. And Lynda is going to talk to us about resilience. This is following on in our resilience mini-series, following our flagship conference event. And I'm going to get Lynda to introduce herself because she's a very talented lady. She runs her own small business, as you know, most of us as independent practitioners do. And she's an organisational psychologist and an author. But I'll let her introduce herself and tell us a bit more about herself. So, Lynda, hello and welcome.
Thank you very much. Really great to be with you guys today from Australia. So just a little bit about me. My background is I'm an org psych by training and profession. So I've spent my whole career helping organizations to get better at the people aspects, both internally first in very large corporate roles in London, and more recently in the last 15 odd years as a consultant running my own business and helping businesses across the globe to get better at the people aspects. I, in 2021, published a book on resilience, particularly with a focus on resilience in leadership. Because while there's a lot of research around resilience in the clinical setting, there's very little research as yet around leaders and leader resilience. So it was super exciting to be able to launch that right in the middle of COVID. Really good timing. I couldn't have picked a better time. And it's based off my PhD research. So it's got really substantive underlying research basis to it. And we specifically researched resilience in an organizational setting.
That's really great. Thank you for that. So our mini-series has been around how we build, as you know, as independent practitioners, how we build resilience into our businesses and also, you know, build resilience personally as well. And I know you are obviously a consultant and run your own small business, but resilience can mean lots of different things to lots of different people. So what's your take on resilience in your arena and as a small business owner?
So I'll give you two aspects to it. I'll give you the research-based aspect, and then I'll talk about my own personal kind of journey as a business owner. So from a research basis, we developed a very clear statement of what resilience is in an organizational setting. And we describe it as the ability to bounce back from adversity and challenge while maintaining psychological, emotional, spiritual, and cognitive well-being. So being able to maintain well-being, I think we often hear the bounce back talked about, but when we did the research, what we found is that's not really resilience, because if you just keep bouncing back, you're going to fall over. So we've seen a lot of people do that over the last few years. They just keep bouncing back. That's not true resilience. True resilience is actually maintaining your health and well-being, no matter how much pressure, how much external stuff is pummeling you, you're still maintaining your well-being. So that leads to the personal side of it. I think when you're running your own business, you're super isolated. And you're often giving out to people every day in every shape or form with very little return back to yourself in your business capacity. So when we start to talk about resilience as a business owner and for senior leaders as well, you know, I see it the same for them. It's about actually taking care of all of those aspects of well-being. You know, are you spiritually satisfied? Are you emotionally balanced? Are you cognitively controlling your thinking and managing your thoughts? are you able to look after yourself physically and in every shape and form? So, I think they dovetail together. And I developed the first ever leadership model of resilience. And we identified 3 key underlying developmental aspects. So we've taken it that next layer to say, okay, resilience is all very nice, but how are you going to develop it? So we've taken it to that next layer, and it's very clearly articulated what you need to do to develop and maintain your resilience.
I think that's really interesting. Thank you for that and for sharing some of your research work and findings on organizational resilience and also your personal journey, so to speak. And I think you are absolutely right. We do talk about bringing your whole self to work sometimes. And much as that phrase gets thrown about a lot, I think when you dissect it the way you've done, which is your physical well-being, mental well-being, faith, emotional, psychological, etc., and you realize that reality is not everyone is interested in all the aspects of it, but you can have the whole person without the entire aspect. And I think leaders and business owners, as you've highlighted, are really good at looking after everyone else, but themselves most of the time. So it's quite important that sometimes we take a minute to look in the mirror, to really reflect on ourselves, our journeys, what we're doing, and whether we're actually looking after our own well-being and being the best of ourselves as well. I'm actually interested to know what the 3 key pillars of resilience that you developed are.
So the 3 key areas that we need to develop from a resilience perspective, the first one is locus of control, and anyone who works in psychology will have come across the term. So what we know is that the minute you're internally locused, you have much more capacity to cope with pressure around you, because you actually take action even when things are quite challenging, and you see things more optimistically, all of that. So internal locus of control is the first one. And different to clinical psychologists, we believe in an organizational setting that is developable. And we have some really key strategies around how to develop that internal locus of control. If you look at some of the great writers in this space, Stephen Covey, 7 Habits, some of the great writers have talked about it for years. We've just put it into one model. So the second aspect is what we've described as self-concept well-being, which in kind of HR speak is emotional intelligence. We use that terminology a lot in organizations. I just had to be careful because I had to get all my PhD research through the ClinPsychs as well as the OrgPsychs. So, that self-concept well-being, knowing yourself, knowing your emotional triggers, managing your emotional reactions, actually cordoning off. I think for independence, it's about learning how to cordon off your emotional life, being open and present with people, but then actually protecting your own emotional reactions. So that whole aspect. The third aspect is what we describe as constructive thinking, which comes from a lot of Seymour Epstein's work. He's one of the experts in this space. Quite a relatively new writer, but super exciting. All that stuff around retraining your brain, getting your brain, this working for you rather than you being directed by your brain. So we talk a lot about how you manage your mental processing. And that could be, through exercise, it could be through meditation. There's lots of strategies around that, but it's actually learning how to control what goes on in your mind. Because if you can control that, then you also have less challenge with your emotional reactions. So the research is really clear that this is the starting point. And actually we did quite complex structural equation modeling, and it shows that constructive thinking has a hugely high correlation between resilience and your ability to lead. So all 3 of those aspects are directly correlated with your ability to lead. So and you would also understand this, without good resilience, you can't lead effectively.
No, you can't.
You can't. So, we know that intuitively, but I wanted to prove that statistically. And so while it took me a very long time to do, it's really a journey into looking at what are the key aspects that leaders need to develop to lead effectively. Resilience is just the in between that. If you've got good resilience, you'll lead more effectively.
I find it really fascinating. It's such an interesting topic, isn't it? Because it's the preconception around resilience, exactly as you described at the beginning, is very much that it's just bouncing back from bad stuff. But actually, it's so much more. And I love the idea of this sort of more holistic approach to it, which is really important. But when we talk about it in that holistic way, it sounds quite simple, doesn't it? We'll just retrain our brains and sort it out. But actually, it's not quite simple, because then you chuck in the emotional intelligence and the human stuff. And, as individuals, we're all very unique, and it's all very difficult because we all have different thought patterns and we all deal with things in different ways. So it sounds simple, but actually it's not. It's a very sort of big area to cover, isn't it?
Yeah, I liken it to, if I want to get physically fit, I can't ask you to go into the gym on my behalf, because that's not going to get me fit. But we want to abdicate. That would be great. But we're trying to abdicate our resilience to external, but actually it takes a huge amount of discipline. I would say, my discipline around my resilience is absolutely controlled. I am more controlled about my resilience than anything else, because if I'm not, I can't deliver to my clients. I'm not going to be in a good space. I'm going to be triggered by things that I shouldn't be triggered by. I'm not going to be able to react in the ways that I should react. I'm not going to pick up those little nuances that tell me something that I would have missed if I wasn't resilient. So for me, and the research tells us that's an absolute prerequisite for leadership. Whether you're leading as an external consultant or an internal leader doesn't really matter.
I think that is very true. And I do some work around emotional intelligence and leadership development and stuff. But yes, I totally agree. It starts with awareness, actually, sort of your emotions, the impact of your behavior on others around you, and just really being aware that when you are in a certain state and how you come across to people and how you affect the teams, the people around you, and vice versa as well. So being aware that there is an element of, okay, you may not be consciously thinking about it all the time, but if you are aware, at least you would know either in the moment or post-event that, hang on a minute, maybe the way I behaved or maybe the way they behaved is a mixture of, and you'll be able to be more objective in your approach to it.
Absolutely. And the mapping that we did around resilience and leadership, we mapped it to transformational leadership. What we found was that, yes, if you take Bass's theories around transformational and transactional, what we found is that, yes, you can still do the transactional stuff. You can still pump out a report or a culture survey for a client. But if your resilience is low, your ability to lead transformationally and get people to change their lives and the way they do things is almost it's zero, basically. So I think, it's beholden on us as consultants and advisors to actually look after ourselves first. If we don't, we really can't lead effectively, and we can't help the leaders we're leading to lead effectively. So I think there's a huge amount of responsibility on our shoulders to take care of ourselves.
Really interesting. I find, this idea of leading yourself, and I want to touch a bit more. I'd like to explore a bit more when you said about discipline and how you sort of have to be very disciplined. It's, what does discipline mean? So how would you approach that? Because for many independent practitioners, and myself and Mary included, we're running our own small business as well, and there's a lot of demands on you day in, day out, and there's a lot of need to switch headspace from one client. So in the sort of the HR realm, potentially there are people who are in one business looking after, and probably again lots of demands on their time, but actually with a consultant working independently, then you chuck into that lots of different clients with different cultures. So different cultures, different approaches, different businesses, different products. So, your whole day is very much focused on switching gear very quickly. So I'm interested in how you can sort of put some discipline in place to protect yourself in that sort of environment.
Yeah, so my disciplines are really consistent. So I have a very strong discipline around my meditation practice and my mindfulness practices. So as I move between clients, I'll do a mindfulness activity just to clean my headspace before I walk into the next client. Because otherwise I take the stuff from the previous client into the next client. So I'm really disciplined about those pieces. The mental controls come from a lot of meditation, mindfulness. I'm also really disciplined about journaling. So journaling out, a bit like what was described earlier, if I've had an interaction that hasn't gone how I wanted it to go, then journaling through, okay, what was my reaction? What did I see in that situation? What would I do differently? That discipline around checking in and evaluating on a regular basis, downloading emotional reactions. I also have a really clear discipline around my emotional cleanup processes. So there are a whole series of things that I will do on a daily and weekly basis to keep myself healthy and well. Also, those physical activities on the weekend of getting out, fresh air. I'm lucky in Australia. It's a beautiful 25-degree day today. So, in the late afternoon, going for a walk rather than just vegging in a heap, so straight from a client. So all of those disciplines around physical, mental, spiritual, all of those healthy things. Also, that ability to keep myself agile mentally. So I do a lot of listening to speakers that I enjoy listening to, topics that I'm interested in. So staying mentally agile as well. So, I think there's a whole series of things and we all have our own activities that we do. I think, you will have your disciplines that you have around it. But yeah, I'm super disciplined about all of those.
I think that those are really, thank you for sharing that. And you are spot on, I would say, especially when you have loads of us working independently and from our home offices, etc. Some people may go out to see clients, some people may go out to network, etc. But the bulk of the time, you probably find that you are working in isolation. And even if you're working in part of a team, lots of your interactions may be virtual as opposed to sort of in-person, etc. So having, and to add in what Charlotte said about looking after several clients, context switching, sometimes it will be just from this phone call, straight into that phone call, or from that email to another email for a different client, etc., or email, phone call, whatever. It will come in variety of shapes and sort of sizes, etc. So being able to manage that discipline in a way that you allow yourself to almost come to your ground level before you kind of go into the next thing, even if it's split seconds, it does help, rather than be on the run constantly and then you find that at the end of the day you crash burn and you totally,
And, it doesn't have to be long. 2 minutes and you can bring yourself back down. But if you don't, then you're carrying all that energy into the next whatever. I'm often going from a workshop to to deliver a conference speech, maybe to coaching, maybe to lead, that constant flow. I need to clean up first, and then, because otherwise I'm not clean for the next client. I think it's an absolute discipline that we need. If we leaders are also under a huge amount of pressure at the moment to lead their businesses effectively in a new way. You look at AI hitting them, you look at virtual leadership. There's a huge amount of stuff hitting leaders, so how do they deal with that if they're not taking care of themselves in that context?
I would agree to some of the things that you said, and sort of adding a couple of things around there in terms of, I think mental health, seeking for mental health support is going up, because for the first time in a long time in the UK sort of society, it's become acceptable to talk about mental health. So the awareness is higher, and people are starting to identify and relate to some of the signs, some of the symptoms, some of this, okay, I actually need help and I need support, and I need to reach out for help. So I do think that is a good thing in a way, but we can all do a bit to help manage, because there are limited resources, limited charities, funding, etc., to support mental health. So if we all do our bit, that we alleviate the pressure on the systems, etc., and some of the things that we've been talking about, looking after ourselves, practicing some sort of mindfulness, physical activity, and all those sort of things would help keep us in a better state mind, and that we look after ourselves and don't put any pressure or loss of pressure. But also, if we get to the point where we do need help, then we should actually reach out and seek help. And I think from employers' point of view and how we can support as consultants, it's also great to facilitate environments where people feel able to or enabled to discuss issues that affect them, their mental well-being, and how it relates to work, the work they do and everything else. Because actually, we find that people don't talk about these things because the perception is that the employers may not be open to it, or they will see them differently. And so they kind of bottle it down until it gets to the point where they can't do anything about it, by which point it's too late, because they've got to the point where they then go off sick for a long period of time, and that impact on them, their business, their team, their colleagues, everything else. So that there are sort of aspects of it that are good, and we can do more and we can do better to harness and to make sure that as we go on, I think if it's 10 years that the research was looking at or whatever, hopefully when we get there, we'll be better equipped to manage the entire situation.
Yeah, and it's interesting, if you look at the trajectory of, our global, still our biggest killer is heart disease. But if you look at the trajectory of heart disease, the number of people dying from it has dropped by 50% in the last few years, because we've done so much with it. I think we've done so little with mental health that we're still at the beginning of that journey of actually supporting people to maintain their mental health. In my view, unless people are looking after their resilience, they are at risk. But also, even if someone's got mental health challenges, if they look after their resilience, it'll help them to manage their mental health better. So, I think it doesn't matter where you sit, because if you take the global stats, 1 in 5 of us is on some sort of medication to cope. So if you take that as a baseline, we're not doing very well societally. So if we can actually help people and build people's capacity, then when those moments hit, then they'll be able to navigate those. I'm lucky as a psych, I'm forced to have external supervision, but I think we should, particularly independent people, I think we should be taking care of ourselves. We should have people we can talk to, download with, debrief with, so what you guys are doing is fantastic. It's providing that resource for people to come and download together, because it's quite isolating when you are supposed to be the expert supporting them. They don't really want to listen to your problems.
No, that's the thing. I think you can spend an entire day listening to a whole heap of problems, And you might start the day feeling really robust and resilient and energized. And by the end of the day, you're on your knees and you're exhausted and you're done, because you've done nothing but listen to people problems. And if you think, some of the people problems we deal with can be quite hard to deal with, long-term sickness cases, disability cases, conflict management, all sorts, disciplinary issues and tribunals, and it can be quite negative, and it can be quite, can really sort of dull you down over a day sometimes. So I think that's really important. But I think one of the things I'm potentially hearing from our conversation, and it's something that I think we need to probably get better at, is this idea of, rather than us as consultants and business owners who serve clients, and that doesn't matter whether it's HR or people professionals or any other sector, anyone that serves clients day to day, you become a people pleaser. And you want to please your clients and you want to deliver for your clients. And so you go all out. But actually, maybe what we need to do is think of ourselves as the expert and, an expert resource that we need to protect. And that actually we protect that so that we can deliver our best every time we speak to a different client and a different person. So, I mean, that's definitely sort of a takeaway I'm picking up on, which I think is just really fascinating.
Yeah, and if you look at, traditionally leadership and leadership development, we focused on teaching people skills. Skills aren't going to help you if you're feeling terrible and you're exhausted. You can have the best skills in the universe, but you can't leverage them unless your energy levels are up. So, I see it as an absolute prerequisite for leaders, because you might have the best skills as a leader, but if your energy is rubbish, what you deliver to your people's rubbish. Same with us as consultants. So, I think, again, we are the resource. So if we're not filling ourselves up and looking after our own energies, then we can't do the job that we do, or not as effectively, I don't think.
Yeah, I think you're right. So in terms of us working with other business leaders, because obviously what we probably want to do is try and sort of spread the word that looking after yourself is a really good thing to do, and that, building good resilience is good to do, but also that it helps you then deliver to your own teams and your own people. What sort of things could we be doing as consultants? How could we promote that within the clients we work with?
So, I think our clients are getting more and more open to talking about resilience, mainly because of the issues they're having with mental health. If you look at the number of people off with stress leave, stress is very high at the moment. It's got worse over COVID, as we know, and it's carried on into post-COVID. So it's actually a really easy topic to bring up with people at the moment. They are open to it, open to talking about it. In my book, I detail all the research basis and the correlations between resilience and leadership effectiveness. So, that's a really good starting point to be talking to leaders about, if you don't look after this, the repercussion is your leadership is affected. And we'll see it in their 360s. We'll see it in their impact in their culture surveys. So, I think it's a really easy conversation to broach, whether you're coaching or mentoring or talking about, people who are being under performance management. I think it's a really easy conversation to bring up at the moment. In my book and on my website, I've got a diagnostic that I use that allows people to measure their own resilience. So that opens up another conversation. Often we think we're more resilient than we actually are. Because we think about it as that bounce back. So, that's a great tool. When I'm coaching people, I'll use that. I'll get someone to do their resilience, measure their resilience, and then we'll just have a conversation about it. So what are you doing about it? And so I think the conversations are really easy. I will open the conversation in any board, any group of exec leaders, anywhere nowadays, because I just think it's become so much easier to have those conversations. We also, when we talk about individual resilience, we also have measures. So there's also a measure in the book around team resilience. So you can also come at it from that angle. If they're battling with their team, so what can we do around building your team resilience and how resilient do you think your team is. So there's a lot of layers to resilience, and we've defined it in each of those contexts: individual, team, and organizational. So, there's lots of ways in, dependent on where you're coming into your client base, to really open up those conversations.
Do you think there's a good correlation between building resilience and actually having really good wellbeing strategies? Because I think, I'm definitely seeing with clients I'm speaking to, there is now much more of a push to having formal, separate wellbeing strategies with a range of things that is covered in that, rather than just saying, oh, there's an EAP, an employee assistance program. No, organizations are looking to do much more than that now. So do you think there's a correlation between those two things?
Definitely. And also, there's a lot of discussion at the moment around psychological safety. If you want to build a psychologically safe workplace, you've got to have everyone with good resilience, quite frankly. Because if I haven't got good resilience, then I might impact you negatively. And if you haven't, then you might impact me. So that whole psychological safety space is a really interesting dynamic, because you really can't create it without good base level resilience. We've got to have the emotional intelligence, we've got to have the locus of control, got to have constructive thinking. So those are all foundations for actually being effective in a team and creating that psychological safety in our team, especially when you look that we're now responsible for people's well-being, even if they're working from home. So, you can't abdicate it anymore, because the courts are saying, doesn't matter whether someone's working from home or not, you're still responsible. So, leaders' responsibility around well-being has extended. And so we really need to be more cognizant of how do we support people's resilience and thereby support their well-being in the workplace and at home.
Yeah, I think the psychological safety is so important. And some of that is what's changed around this idea that actually people are talking about mental health more as well. Because if we go back to the traditional understanding of resilience, which is you fall down, you get back up, it's that bounce back, you get up and you get back on with it. And also you don't come into the workplace and talk about it. Those are the two sort of historical angles that we've always had. And that's what we're trying to move away from. Because actually it's okay to come in and talk about it. It's not going to affect your position in the company, and it's okay to say, I'm not okay. And I think that's such a shift, isn't it? That's really shifted on in the last few years.
Yeah. And, I think the conversation has opened up dramatically. I find even, it doesn't matter what sector. I do a fair amount of work in the mining sector, which is traditionally very, male dominated, very macho. And even in there now, we're opening up conversations that we would never have had even 5 years ago. So I think, that opening up, I'm not saying that they're not still people who are, I'm okay, but there's certainly an appetite to have those conversations. We run online resilience programs across multiple organizations. Online isn't always the easiest, but it certainly gets the messages out and gives people some tools.
It means you can reach more people as well. I think that's the thing. It just means we can reach far more people in that platform.
And so, all those access routes, I think we've got lots of access routes to talk about resilience. If someone's battling as a leader and they come to us for coaching, then it's a super easy conversation. If they're battling with psychological safety in the team, then it's easy access through their team. If it's organizational and they've had a culture review that shows they've got some challenges, again, it's an easy access route. I believe that, fundamentally, if we don't fix the resilience issues, we're going to find it really difficult to lead organizations going forward. The pressure's not.
I was going to say, great. It's been a great, interesting and fascinating discussion. And I think we've touched on a lot of areas, each of which can be explored into further details and discussion on its own. I'm sure Charlotte said we'll put a link to your book in the podcast when it goes out so that people can look it up, and if they have any questions, probably contact you directly in the organization and how they can be supported and all. But we always like to end each episode with top 3 tips that you can give to our listeners and our audience on how they can build or increase their resilience.
My first tip is actually recognize that you're the most important person in all of this, because if we don't look after ourselves, we can't look after our clients. The second tip is really around being disciplined about your routine in what you need to do to stay clean and healthy and resilient. So having a discipline and a routine about it, because it's not something you can do once off and it's suddenly fixed. It is an ongoing piece of work. And the third one would be, be gentle with yourself. I think as consultants, we're really hard on ourselves. We don't always get it right. We don't always provide the best that we could, but I think we need to be gentle with ourselves and recognize that, we're not perfect. We do make messes, and just be able to forgive ourselves and look after ourselves in that context.
Great top tips there. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Fascinating conversation. We really appreciate you coming on and talking to us and our listeners. So if you are, keep a lookout for our next edition in this mini-series. And as ever, thank you very much for listening. If you would like to feature as a guest on our podcast, then of course you can make contact to HR Voices, and we would love to have you. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of HR Voices. If you have a topic you'd like us to cover or would like to be a guest, we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us on social media or email us at hrvoices@hrindependence.co.uk. Tune in next time.